Hi everyone, today was going to be my review of Hero of Ages, which is book 3 in the Mistborn Trilogy, but I kind of had second thoughts about doing a regular review for this book because it is book 3 in a trilogy and it's pretty hard to do a spoiler-free review of something when you get that far along. I felt like the number of people that wanted to hear just my thoughts on the Hero of Ages with spoilers, I don't know, I wanted to do something a little bit more general for this video, so I am going to share my thoughts about the Hero of Ages in this video, but I'm also going to treat this as kind of a wrap-up for my Cosmere reread of the Mistborn Trilogy overall as well. If Well of Ascension was kind of my surprise favorite in this reread, I feel like, honestly, the Hero of Ages was probably my least favorite. I really like where he took the series too, and I love the trilogy overall, but just in terms of being fun to read, I didn't enjoy the Hero of Ages as much as the first two in the trilogy, and that is probably just down to personal preference. I still find it really funny to look back and remember that my first time reading the Mistborn Trilogy was on a beach in 2009, which was spring break during my sophomore year, and I had no idea all the stuff that Sanderson was going to write at that point, or even that I was going to end up being such a huge Brandon Sanderson fan, and I definitely had no idea I'd be doing videos about my reread of the entire Cosmere for a booktube channel 10 years later. I guess it's actually like 11 years, 11 and a half years later. Anyway, it was a really long time ago that I first read this series, so it's been fun doing this reread, and I definitely have very different feelings about it compared to how I felt when I was in college. What the Mistborn Trilogy does probably better than any other books that have been written, and probably even the best out of Sanderson's books, is that the magic system is really, really well developed. It's basically the perfect illustration of Sanderson's first law of magic. So for those of you who don't know what Sanderson's first law of magic is, because I mean, maybe you're not quite as strange as I am. I don't know. Okay, so Sanderson's first law is basically a law for writers. It's that the more you develop and explain a magic system in your story, the more you can effectively use it as a plot device or a way to resolve your plot. I don't know if I've worded that perfectly, but that's basically the general idea. So with the 3 different related magic series that are in the Mistborn Trilogy, you spend basically the whole trilogy learning more and more about how they work, to the point where the role that they play in the story and the resolution of the plot and all the arcs is definitely something that feels very, very effective. I don't feel like you get that in depth with any other magic system, even out of the ones that Sanderson has written. One of the things that really, really surprised me rereading this series that honestly I didn't remember is just how slowly and carefully we develop our knowledge of all these different magic systems. You learn very, very slowly in the first book about allomancy, and then for Rukami, you only kind of find out towards the end of the book, and it does end up playing a crucial role in the end of book 1. And then hemalurgy, which is the third magic system, the one that revolves around, spoilers, putting spikes in people, that you only really understand how it works in book 3. It gets kind of hinted at in book 2, but you don't really get there even until book 3. So all of those magic systems together end up playing a pretty important role in the Mistborn trilogy, and I think in that way, Mistborn is kind of the classic Brandon Sanderson magic system trilogy. It's a pretty perfect demonstration of what he does with magic systems. This was the first complete series that he ever wrote, and each book is pretty different. I've said before, and I'm sure other people have observed this as well, the first book is kind of on its own, and then books 2 and 3 are a little bit more tightly linked. Premise for book 1 is basically a heist story. It's a heist based on what would have happened if the chosen one hero had failed, and 1,000 years later a bunch of thieves and criminals had to overthrow the Dark Lord. Then book 2 deals with what happens after the Dark Lord has fallen, and there's a bunch of cleanup that has to happen and things aren't going so well. To me, this is probably the book that I connected with the most emotionally out of the whole trilogy. And then in book 3, The Hero of Ages, we've kind of gotten back onto our world-ending stakes. The world is literally going to end if the characters don't do something about it, and it feels like a pretty hopeless cause. So it wraps up a lot of different elements from the trilogy, and you learn a lot more about some of the things that were happening behind the scenes in the first 2 books, but it also felt kind of the least personal out of the trilogy to me. Sanderson does something that I found he's doing in the Stormlight Archives as well, which is something might get hinted at for all of a book, but then at the beginning of the next book, you as the reader just get dumped with a ton of information about the magic and how things work, and basically whatever you need to know to continue the story. So I kind of like that, but it constantly surprises me when he does it, because you're expecting to keep getting answers at this really slow rate, and instead it's like, here's all the information, enjoy, here we go. So that's something I should know to expect from him by now, and I kind of do, but it still took me by surprise in The Hero of Ages. And just by saying that The Hero of Ages was my least favorite book in the trilogy, I don't mean that I didn't like it. I really loved the trilogy, and I feel like Hero of Ages wrapped up the trilogy really, really well. It developed all the themes and ideas. It was a very satisfying conclusion. I just feel like personally, I didn't enjoy the act of reading it as much as I enjoyed the first two. I didn't think it was as much fun. Part of this is because a couple of the character arcs, which are super, super important to the plot, I just didn't enjoy reading very much. I didn't really enjoy those character arcs. I really enjoyed where those character arcs ended up. I just didn't enjoy the process of getting there as much as I should have. But it was still satisfying when things got resolved. I still appreciate everything he was doing with it. It just, maybe I'll do a spoiler section in a little while and talk about specifically which characters I'm talking about here. But there were a couple where their points of view just, I got a little sick of them before they got to the point. There are also a couple of character arcs, including one point of view that we haven't had before in book 3 that I really, really loved, and it's one of my favorite things. So I think that's also a problem, right? Usually I avoid this in Sanderson books, but when there's one point of view that you are really way more interested in than like the other 4 that you are jumping between, that is kind of a pacing problem because you're just trying to get through the characters that you're less interested in order to get to the character you really want to hear more about. Overall, I think the Mistborn trilogy has some very, very memorable characters. I do find that 8 to 10 years since the last time I read the books, I basically remember who all the characters are. I remember their names. I remember their characteristics. It all felt very familiar in a very nice way. And I think that's the mark of a good writer to me, is if after a decade you remember the names and personalities of the characters in the story, obviously the author was doing something right. I definitely connected to different elements of the characters than I did 10 years ago, and in some ways I felt like I understood a lot more about some of the emotional character arcs that Sanderson was trying to show. Even some of the ones about younger characters, I could sort of relate to it more from a distance than I could when I was the same age as the characters. A lot of people, including the author himself, recommend the Mistborn Trilogy as the place to start reading Sanderson, and I think I understood why that is. The trilogy, especially the first book, is very easy to get into, and the writing is very easy to digest. The books showcase a lot of the things that are quintessential Sanderson and that he does really well in his writing, including the magic systems, which I talked about already. A lot of the character themes that are in Mistborn are also important in his other books. I've mentioned before that he pretty much always touches upon the idea of religion. It's kind of different how he handles it in every book, but it's always something that his characters are dealing with, and sometimes in very different ways. So in the Mistborn trilogy, this mostly comes through Sazed, who is the terrace keeper who has preserved all of these religions that have mostly all died out and been lost, but he's hoping to bring them back when he has the opportunity. Sazed is a character that deals with religion in a very intellectual way, and is something he deals with throughout the trilogy, but it ends up being pretty important to the series. Other characters deal with how to create a religion, or what the meaning of a more fundamental faith or belief is, what it means to have faith in the face of overwhelming odds. So I think those are the ways that Mistborn really deals with religion. Some of his other books handle it very differently, but it is something that comes up in pretty much all of his writing. Honestly, Sazed reminds me the most in some ways of Yasna from the Stormlight Archive, because both of them are very intellectual, even though Sazed is someone who's interested in religion and Yasna is an atheist. I think that they have a similar intellectual approach to looking for meaning in all religions rather than really being believers. Sanderson also often deals with themes of leadership and how to rule and how to be a good leader. So the Mistborn trilogy basically has a lot of the classic Sanderson stuff. You have the discussion of religion, you have pretty likable, engaging, memorable characters, you have magic systems that are very well developed and are used in the plot, and then you have pretty cool action scenes that use those magic systems in interesting ways, so that you basically see the whole book happening in front of you like you're watching a TV show. So I think those are basically the things that Sanderson does really well. I do think I can see this big jump forward in his writing style, starting with The Way of Kings. That might be why The Way of Kings was really the book that sucked me into Sanderson the most, the book that I think really made me a true fan. But I have really enjoyed revisiting these earlier Cosmere books, and I think the Mistborn trilogy is a very impressive accomplishment. I feel like there are more writers that have done complicated magic systems and heist stories and some of the non-traditional things that Sanderson was one of the first to do in Mistborn. It's like a new look at fantasy that wasn't the gritty George R.R. Martin style grimdark fantasy. There are plenty of other examples of that out there now, but I think at the time it was a little more unusual. So I would say that's pretty much a wrap up on my reread of this trilogy. I really enjoyed revisiting it, and I feel like I definitely appreciated a lot of the Cosmere things in it. This was a series where he didn't really know how much of the Cosmere he was going to get to write, so there are just kind of little Easter eggs in these three books. He doesn't get very in-depth to the behind-the-scenes stuff that was going on with Hoyd and all sorts of other things. You find out a little bit more about that stuff in later Mistborn books. I definitely, after reading the trilogy, I feel more excited than I realized to see where he's going to go with the other Mistborn books, and I'm kind of curious to give the second Mistborn series another shot. Those are shorter books, and I never loved them all that much. I mean, I liked them fine. I have not really disliked that much that Brandon Sanderson has written, but I don't think the second series lives up to the first series at all. They're okay. But I'm looking forward to reading them so close to reading Mistborn and seeing what things I pick up on. I'm also super excited to see where he continues taking this magic system. I know in the last section of the Mistborn series, which I think will be at this point books 11 through 13, unless he adds more. There was actually a funny video he posted on his channel recently from one of his live streams where he forgot how many books were in the Mistborn series because of the ones that got added. But anyway, it's going to eventually be science fiction using this magic system with faster than light travel, and it's going to include the whole Cosmere, and I think be kind of one of the pivotal end sequences in the Cosmere. So I'm really looking forward to seeing those books, even though it's probably going to be in like 20 years. So, you know, he better keep writing at the speed he is right now. So before I wrap up this video, I should do a few specific things about the Hero of Ages, because this was supposed to be my Hero of Ages review, even though I basically made it very much not that. So if you don't want any spoilers for the Hero of Ages, now would be a good time to stop watching. The storylines that I was referring to before that really kind of bored me in the Hero of Ages, I just have a hard time with Sazed's depression plot in this book. It's a little unfair because it's kind of understandable what he's going through and why, but I feel like it just took too long for him to really get engaged with the story and start doing things. And a lot of the book, he's just feeling kind of miserable and doubting everything. The thing is, it wraps up in a really satisfying way. The way that plot arc concludes with him being the Hero of Ages, that is really awesome. And I actually remember Sanderson writing about how he gave Sazed this thing to do, which was to look through the portfolio of all his religions, because otherwise he was just completely depressed and not doing anything. So in this book, he is basically in his different sections, he keeps going through and evaluating different religions to see if he can find truth in any of them, because he's feeling like it was all pointless. It kind of works for me, but not really. I didn't really enjoy reading those things. I did like seeing how they all got used in the end, but I did not enjoy a large portion of that arc, even though I understood why the character was going through that, and it wrapped up in a really satisfying way. Similar feelings about Spook's arc. I just never really cared about him as a character. I didn't really care what happened to him. I did not really have a lot of sympathy for what he was going through, and I just didn't enjoy reading his chapters. Maybe there are people out there that really like him as a character, but again, I like where it got to. It had a very important role to play in how the story got resolved, and that was cool. I like how that got used, but I just didn't really enjoy his perspective very much at all, and I kind of wish there had been less of it. On the other hand, I absolutely loved Tensoon's point of view and getting to learn more about the Khandra. I really loved all of his chapters. If the whole book had been Tensoon, I would have been super happy. He was already one of my favorite characters in the Well of Ascension, and then the way it got developed with the Khandra actually being the original Terrace people, it was just very cool. I really liked getting to see that society. I really liked the Khandra. I like them in the later books as well. So that was probably my favorite part to read in The Hero of Ages. The other issue that I kind of had with this book, which I half enjoyed and half bothered me, is just the level of info dumping that you're getting in the epigraphs. I don't really like it when authors throw a huge amount of information into those italicized epigraphs at the beginning of chapters. And in this book, the thing that's cool about it is that you don't really know who's writing it. And at first you think it's the Lord Ruler, but then as it goes on, you realize it's not. It's whoever becomes the new Hero of Ages. And if you know what you're looking for, you can pretty clearly see that it is Sazed because the style of the writing matches his voice in the story. So that's cool, and I like all the information that he's giving us. A lot of it does have larger Cosmere implications, but it also does feel a little too info dumpy to me. So I do have kind of mixed feelings, right? Like we spent all these books not really understanding hemalurgy, and then you just have Sazed at the beginning of every chapter explaining how hemalurgy works. On the other hand, the reveals about how hemalurgy works are really cool. I think it's really different and interesting, definitely pretty horrifying. One of the moments that I'll never forget in the Hero of Ages is when we finally find out how Koloss are made after wondering about it for several books. It is very horrifying. So I'm kind of looking forward to my reread of the next Mistborn books, even though I'm pretty sure they won't be my favorites. I'm also looking forward to reading Mistborn: A Secret History, which is the Kelsier book that gives a lot of behind-the-scenes Cosmere information. So thanks for watching along with the Cosmere reread so far. I hope you enjoyed this not really a review of the Hero of Ages. I hope it was a video that some people will be interested in, and thanks so much for watching.